Thank you for tuning in to watch or to listen to this message today. Wherever you are, at home, in your car, on your computer, on your phone, we're just excited that you're spending time with us. We are on a mission here at CRB to lead people to know and love Jesus. And so if you call this place your home, I encourage you to visit our Give page on our website, where you can find a few easy ways to faithfully support God's work here at the church, financially, through online giving. At CRB, we believe that love will save the world, and the best place to do that is in the local church. So if you live in San Diego or if you're visiting the area, we just want to invite you to come join us on a weekend, come hang out with us, and be a part of the family here. Enjoy the message.
Well, I hope everybody's having a fantastic week, enjoying this beautiful San Diego weather that we're having. We are coming to the conclusion of a series that we've been in for the last few weeks together called Forward Motion. And for us, this is really as the page turns on a new year. It's sort of a New Year's resolutions kind of a series. I don't know how many New Year's resolutions people we have here. Anybody make New Year's resolutions? Anybody? It's kind of a pessimistic crowd, apparently. Tried it, nope. Well, we're going to start a new series next week called Staying Put, 7 Ways to Ignore God in Your Life and How to Never Change. Glad I didn't ask that the first week of the series, you know, Harry? I mean, we would have been in some trouble. Anybody make New Year's resolutions for somebody else? We'll try that. Anybody done that? I need my wife to learn these 7 things this year, and we're going to try to do that. We have been talking about this idea that God loves you just the way that you are. I love that about God. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian, doesn't matter if you're just sort of exploring faith. God loves you just the way that you are. But this is true for all of us, whether you're 8 or 80. He refuses to leave you that way. He wants to make you more like Jesus. He wants to make me more like Jesus. And if you're anything like me, that's a tall order. You're like, I got a long way to go in life to begin to look like Jesus. But that's true for all of us. And it's just baby steps. It's not looking at the massive leaps in life and going, man, that's too far to go. I don't know how I'm ever going to get there. It's looking at the next step in front of you. It's looking at the next step in front of me and saying, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other on the journey. And I'm just going to begin to take steps, gradual steps. And so we started talking about this idea of fear that can often ensnare the heart. And at one level, that can be a good thing because it's the fear of the Lord that is the foundation, the beginning of wisdom is what we said early on in this series. And over time, we have to move beyond the foundations of fear towards love. And so a New Year's resolution for me this year is less fear, more love. That my heart would begin to be captured by loving other people and not just being afraid of other people, but I turn down the fear dial, turn up the love dial. Last week, we talked about moving away from misery and moving towards mystery. And that if we're ever going to get where we've never been before in life, we have to start to do some things that we've never done. And we find ourselves on mysterious territory, some places that last week we called the land between, where we go, I've never been here before. And like the Israelites, it's a scary place to be. And so we looked at the Exodus story last week, and God met them there and said, I will be your daily bread. And for us in 2017, the good news is Jesus says, I am your daily bread. I will meet you wherever you are. And I will provide for you enough for today. And that's the beautiful thing about growth and journeying. It's not about the whole way that we have to go. It's about today. What am I supposed to do? What's the thing in front of me of the step, the journey of where I'm supposed to go? It's not about looking around and going, well, how's she doing? Well, how is he doing? How's everybody else doing? It's about me. What's the next step for me to take in my life that God's inviting for me to take today? So if you have a Bible, I encourage you to open it to Exodus 13, the second book of the scriptures. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. We put these verses along on the screen where you can follow along. And if you don't have a Bible, you'd like to download our CRB app, that's a great place. I see some of those LED glows firing up, which is a good thing. You can download the CRB app. It's a great place to follow along. You can go to the message notes section. All of the scriptures that I'll be talking about this morning will be right there. There's even a little place where you can take notes as well. Exodus chapter 13. We started talking about this last week, that God meets the people of God in slavery. And if you had a hard time parking this morning, it's because I stole all the cones. God meets the slaves in Egypt. And if you weren't here last week, you can go back and watch the message, or you can go watch the movie Prince of Egypt. Both will sort of give you a summary of the story. But God meets people in slavery, in bondage, and he calls them out of that. They're under the thumb of the Pharaoh, and they start moving towards what is now their homeland, towards Israel. And this journey, if you remember back to last week, took how long? Anybody? 40 years. Very good. They begin taking this journey, and it wasn't supposed to go this long. God leads them in the desert, and they're there for a while with some object lessons. And we said last week that their story is often a metaphor for our story, our journeys in life. It's 2 steps ahead, 10 steps back. It's wandering. It's a windy road getting where we're supposed to go. And so we talked about that last week. And I want to pick up in the middle of that story. And there's a verse that for years has sort of troubled me, but at the same time is, I think for so many of us, is so perfect description of what life looks like. Exodus chapter 13, they've been released from Egyptian captivity. They've been released from their misery, as we said last week. They're beginning the journey. And as they move forward on the path, notice something that God says. It says, when the Pharaoh, verse 17 of Exodus 13, when the Pharaoh let the people go, the Pharaoh is the ruler of the world at this point, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. You kind of read over that, but when I look at that, there was a shorter way that they could have gone, but they don't go that way. They go the longer, windy, scenic route. Apparently, this did not have to take 40 years. Apparently, there was a better way to get there. There was an easier way to get there, but they don't go that way. They go the long, windy, difficult path. How many of us, you go, well, that is my life story. You've always chosen a more difficult path. Now, if you read the sweep of the Exodus story, if you read the scope of the story, you know that God doesn't lead them through Philistia because if he led them through Philistia, there's a lot of great warriors, military warriors that are there. But if you read all of the scriptures, the David and Goliath story in particular, Goliath is a Philistine. Apparently, defeating the Philistines is not an obstacle for God. He could have defeated them. There was an easier path, but they don't go that way. They go the long, sort of windy, scenic route of 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, 5 steps forward, 15 steps back. There was an easier way, but they didn't take that way. For many of us, if you were to tell your life story, your faith story, what got you to begin to be curious about faith, what got you in the building, what got you to say, I want to follow Jesus, you have always, and I don't mean this in shallow or negative terms, you have always been an easy path or a short path, the path of least resistance kind of a person. You have always had this ability to avoid pain, heartache when it is unnecessary. There are those of us in this room, maybe somewhere along the way, a mom, a dad, somebody told you, hey, don't drink too much, don't get drunk. You didn't need to test that theory. You just sort of obeyed it. You thought, if I can avoid unnecessary heartache, then I will. Maybe somebody said, hey, don't spend money in that direction. Don't waste your money. You didn't need to learn that lesson the hard way. You have always been wired with an obedient heart. You are wired to take the shorter, more direct path to get where you are supposed to go in life. And if that's you, that's a beautiful thing. You don't regret that, do you? I've never had anybody come and sit in my office and go, I wish I would have slept with more people before I got married. I mean, that would have made my marriage so much easier. I've never had anybody, hey, what's the problem? I don't get drunk enough. That would just help me make so many better decisions if I would just drink more, and it's a real struggle and it's a real problem. No, you don't have regrets for taking the path that has least resistance or less painful circumstances attached to it. It's a beautiful thing. On the other side of the coin, there are those of us in this room that are more like Israel. You have always chosen the harder, more difficult path to learn a lesson or to understand what it is that you are supposed to understand. For some of us, isn't it true? There are burns on your fingers from when you were a child and your mom said, do not touch the stove, but you just had to learn that lesson the hard way. People come up to you and say, well, money is not going to make you happy. And you are thinking to yourself, I appreciate that, but I prefer to learn that lesson on my own. Thank you for the feedback. There are those of us, you have always chosen the hard, wandering, more difficult path. You just are wired in such a way in your heart. And for some of us, even a sense of pride or a source of pride. Well, nobody's gonna fool me. I mean, it becomes sort of a wiring and something that we can become proud of. We're like Israel. There's a shorter way, but you never go that way. Some of us, this explains all the tension you have in your marriage right now. One of you is a shorter path. There's an easier way to do this, honey. Someone else in the marriage is a difficult path, is going to just learn things the hard way. Some of us, this is the tension you experience with a son or daughter. You raise them to be on the path of the straight and narrow. You raise them to take the direct route. But somewhere along the way, high school, college, maybe even earlier than that, they began to wander from the path. And from your perspective, they're never going to get where they're supposed to go. But from the perspective of God, what looks like plan C, plan D, plan F, from your vantage point as mom or dad, is actually still plan A for God. And he's still holding them in the palm of his hand. And he's still leading and guiding them exactly where they're gonna go. It's just going to be a long, scenic route to get there. And all across the building, we have different journeys, different faith stories. Even when you look at the 12 disciples, it's completely different in terms of how they journey to where they are supposed to be in following Jesus. That's the beauty of our community. We all get to where we're supposed to go in different ways. Some of us just take a scenic, longer route to get there. This can often produce a sense of testimony envy, where you hear somebody's story and you think, I wish God worked in my life like that. Some of us, you have friends that they will tell their faith story, moments that it seemed like heaven crashed into earth. God spoke to them. And you think, I wish God did that for me, because you hear their story, their journey, and you go, well, I don't have a story like that. Several years ago, I was working in student ministry, and I was working with high school kids, and we had this professional athlete come and speak to our student group. And this athlete told the sort of classic high school assembly youth group story of drugs and sex and rock and roll. And you listen to this story, and about halfway through, you're thinking to yourself, how are you still alive? You know these kinds of stories. And when it was over, this girl came up to me, 17 years old or so. She had been in our student ministry for her whole life. She'd been a part of at the church her entire life. And she has a tear in her eye. And she said, I have the lamest testimony. I have like the lamest faith story ever. I've always done what I'm supposed to do. If you are an easy path person, celebrate it. Don't look at somebody else's story. Celebrate your own unique journey, that you have a wisdom, you have a clarity about you, that you don't have to learn things the hard way. That's a beautiful thing. Others of us that have always wandered off the path, maybe you're just coming back to church, maybe you're in a small group for the first time, or you're starting to ask more questions about faith. You hear somebody else's story, someone who's an easier path, more direct path kind of a person, and you think to yourself, I wish I could have learned that lesson that you have understood the easy way. I wish it didn't cost me my first marriage. I wish it didn't cost me that much money. I wish I didn't have to learn that after the second bankruptcy. If I would have understood that, if I would have just listened, it would have saved me so much heartache and pain. And there's regret there. But celebrate the way that God is working in your story as well. Because the reality is for you, isn't it true? The turns, the burns, the heartaches, the heart that you have that has built a scar tissue at this moment, God has used all of that to tune out the things in life that don't matter and tune your heart into the things that actually do. And there's a sense of regret that sets in, that it could have been easier to get where you were supposed to go, but God has used plan C, plan D, plan F. What to you was a derailment of the trajectory, God has used it all in your story. He hasn't wasted any of that pain, and he's put you on the path that you're supposed to be on through all of the heartache. Don't regret however God is working in your story. Some of us, it will be easier. We'll listen more. You're wired to be more obedient. Others of us are more like Israel. It's just going to be a wandering, scenic route to get where we're supposed to go. I would argue as well, we're all born, and if you look at the story of Exodus, the same is true for them. We're all born at different places along the journey. We're all born at different places. I have a friend, he came to faith later in life, and we'll often meet and talk about the Bible, and he's in his 50s, and we'll sit down and he'll ask questions about the Bible, and we'll get to the end of our lunch or time, and he'll often say, Jared, you're such a better Christian than me. You know so much more about the Bible. And I always remind him, Tom, I'm not a better Christian than you. I was just raised in this. I mean, I was just born, I was flannel graphing the Noah story when I was 2. That doesn't make me a better Christian. And there is a tendency, especially those of us that are just beginning a faith journey, whatever age, stage of life, your temptation will be to compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. Allow God to meet you where you are at this point of the story. And it's not about how far you have to go. It's about the next step in front of you. That is what God is going to celebrate. On the other side of the coin, there are those of us that you're like me, you've grown up in church. And the tendency is to mistake growing up as a Christian with growing as a Christian. They're profoundly different, aren't they? And our tendency is to look at how much we know or how long we've been coming to church, or, we know all the, sort of insider lingo and language, and think, well, that means I'm spiritually mature. But just because you're born on third base does not mean you hit a triple. Are you with me? Let that settle in for a moment. Just because you're born on third base, it doesn't mean, wow, look at how far. No, you were born into this. Don't mistake growing up as a Christian with growing as a Christian. It's about from wherever you are. Take the next step, whether you're a long, windy, scenic route kind of an individual, or whether you're a direct route kind of a person. We all have room for growth. Several years ago, 10 years ago or so, when I first became a pastor, it was really my first church. Graduated from seminary, which is where you go to be a preacher. Go get your undergrad, then you go to this other place to be a preacher. And graduated from seminary, and then went to my first church in Costa Mesa, California. And at our church, we had run out of space at our facility. And we opened up a campus. It was a new campus, but we didn't have the money to buy a building. And so we ended up, there was a facility in town. It was a club called the Shark Club. If you're familiar with Costa Mesa, it's right there off Bear Street. And I think it's still there to this very day. And we would do church inside of the Shark Club on Sundays. It was a club from Monday to Saturday night, about 2 a.m. We'd roll up about 6 a.m. on Sunday morning, start setting up. Sometimes you just meet people that had passed out from the night before. Woo, new party showing up. I like this club, man. This is awesome. And you meet all kinds of fascinating people at the Shark Club. I would preach literally from the middle of a dance floor. That was awesome. And there was a disco ball that hung up, and you were looking at that the whole time. There's actually one here at CRB, which I love that too. You always wondered what goes on here during the week. DJ Harry, man, it's awesome. It's just... we come in here, my inner John Travolta, just let it go. But we would meet all kinds of interesting people. And there was a shark tank. This is true. You can't make this stuff up. There was a shark tank in the middle of the club with a live, pretty good-sized shark that would swim around in it. And the whole time I'm preaching, I'm just staring at this massive shark right there. You thought you were nervous about getting baptized here at CRB, man. You love Jesus? Get in, man. Get in. There was this lady that would come, and she would sit on the 4th row pretty much every single week. And it was early on and being a pastor, and it just seared into my heart. Because she would come up and she would tell her story every week of leaving addiction, leaving heartache, and she would always start her story with, I know I'm a train wreck, Jared. I know I'm a train wreck. I know I'm a train wreck. And every week I'd remind her, you're the best Christian in the building. Because you have come so far on the journey. And you're being obedient to the next step in front of you. And the faith journey is not about appearances and how well it looks to everybody else, how you're doing. It's about, are you being obedient from where you are, taking the next step on the journey? And this story ultimately is not really about us. It's not really about Israel. It's about the nature and character of God. And how God the whole time, as Paul says in the book of Philippians, is carrying us to completion. The whole time, God is actually the one who's sustaining and holding his people up. And the same thing that was true for them is true for us. And often we read the 10 Commandments in our world. We describe the 10 Commandments as good rules to live by, which they are, not negating that at all, but they're profoundly elementary. Because the 10 Commandments God gives to the nation of Israel as they're moving out of slavery very early into the journey. We often rip those out of context, and people in our culture, our world will say, well, I just sort of live by the 10 Commandments. They're good rules, they're good commands, which they certainly are, but they're profoundly elementary. They were revolutionary for where Israel was at this moment. But for us in 2017, as Christ followers, they're profoundly elementary. Because the 10 Commandments are all about God meeting people where they are. A group of people that does not have a constitution, they don't have education, they have no sense of what it even means to be human, and God is meeting them and beginning to put them together. Let's read a few of the 10 Commandments together. I want us to see it through that lens of God just meeting people on their journey. This isn't just a story about Israel, this is ultimately a story about the character and the nature of God and the grace of God. Meeting people where they are, not asking them to take a giant leap, but asking them just to take a step. Exodus chapter 20 is where the 10 Commandments begin. It says this, and God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. And so God tells the people very early on the journey, he says, in terms of worship, Israel, I need you to do something. Stop worshiping gods that aren't there. Do we need to know anything else at this moment, God? Nope, that's it. Right now, you're bowing down to things that don't exist. I just need you to do this. Don't bow down to something that's not there. Do we need to love God? Do we need to serve the poor? Nope, right now, this is it. We need you just to stop bowing down to things that aren't real. And after you do that for a while, we'll take the next step together. Have no false gods in your life. Okay, we're gonna try that for a while. And then he comes with more commandments. I just wanna give a snapshot of a few of these, but notice at this time, it sounds like, okay, well that's basic, don't worship things that aren't real. But for this crew of people, this is revolutionary. It's transforming them in the way that God transforms people, not in massive leaps, but in steps. He says this in verse 13, he says, you shall not murder, which I think all of us are hopefully on board with. He says, in terms of other people, in terms of relationships, he said, here's the rule, Israel, don't kill each other. Which the 10 Commandments are sort of like the signs you see at the zoo, where it will say, do not get in the cage with the gorillas. And you have that moment, don't you? I know I do, where you go, I wonder who did that. That sign's there because someone attempted it. All of this is going on for Israel. And so God is telling them in terms of their context, stop killing each other. I know it's hot in the tents, Israel. I know you have people in the tents that snore at night, but no waking up and killing them for it. In terms of other people, God, do we need to know anything else? Nope, at this moment, that's it. Stop killing each other. That's the rule. You do that for a while, you stop killing each other, we'll get to something else. But at this moment, he's meeting this group of people that has just left slavery, and he's saying, this is what you need to know. Don't kill each other. Don't bow down to things that aren't there. He goes on. Some of the Israelites had gotten married. God says that's a great thing. He says this in Exodus chapter 20, verse 14, the next commandment. He says, you shall not commit adultery. So he says, okay, some of you have pledged your life to a husband, to a wife. That's a great thing. God celebrates that. But he says, here's the deal, Israel. In terms of marriage, don't sleep with somebody who's not your wife. Don't sleep with somebody who's not your husband. No sneaking out of the tents at night, Israel. I don't care how cute he is. I don't care how cute she is. Do we need to know anything else, God? Are we supposed to love our spouse? Or what are we supposed to? Nope, this is it for now. This is about as much as you can handle. Don't sleep with someone who's not your husband or not your wife, Israel. That's what you're supposed to know and do. God meets them where they are in terms of worship, in terms of marriage, in terms of other people. He gives them just basic elementary instruction because that's where they are. Jesus comes on the scene. And he's not leading people out of one geographical location to the next. He's leading people out of one way of relating to God to another way of relating to God. He's leading people out of a framework of law and do's and don'ts and lists and instructions to spirit, to a different kind of understanding where it's about love. It's about something beyond just don't do this and do this. He's leading people out of one understanding to God into a new understanding of God. And so with that, Jesus will often say things like, you have heard it said, but I tell you, there's a new way. Take a new step. 1,500 or so years later, after these words have been spoken to Moses, Jesus says, let's go in a different direction. Let's go beyond where we have been. Notice some of the things that Jesus says. Matthew chapter 22, verse 37. Someone had asked him, how do you summarize all the commands, all the laws? And Jesus says, well, let me try by explaining it this way. Verse 37, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He's not just ripping that out of context. He's saying it to a group of people that know and believe you don't bow down to gods that don't exist. And so what Jesus is saying is instead of just don't worship something that's not there, begin to worship and love the God who actually is. You've been doing this for a while, Israel. Now it's time to take a step in your heart. Begin to love the God who's actually there, not just in terms of rules, rituals, but in terms of your heart. Begin to love God. It's not just don't worship something that's not there. Begin to love the God who actually is. Let's take the next step. In terms of other people, notice what Jesus says. John chapter 15, verse 13. The rule has been, don't kill each other. Jesus says, I think we can do a little better than that. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So don't kill somebody, which is good, but let's get beyond that point. And the goal ultimately is that you wouldn't just not take somebody's life, but you would value somebody's life more than you even value your own. And you would be willing in your own life to be so sacrificial, so loving, so generous towards somebody else. Let's take a step, Israel. It's good. It's a nice thing that you're not killing somebody, but let's, as followers of Jesus, begin to actually love somebody. In terms of marriage, Paul gets in on this, and he's saying in light of the cross, in light of the resurrection, the whole world's being put back together in the person of Jesus. Marriages are being put back together to look the way that God designs and intends them to look in the Garden of Eden. And so you've had this rule, do not commit adultery. And Paul says, I think it's time we do a little better than that. And this is revolutionary for the audience 2,000 years ago, but this is what Paul says to a group of people in a city called Ephesus. He says this, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, husbands, love your wives. And there's a previous part where it says, wives, submit to your husbands. And then a lot of times, especially as men, we'll sort of put a period there and move on from that. But there's another verse. Might be the whole reason you came to church today, to hear this one passage. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. What did Christ do for the church? He died for the church. So guys, you really got the short end of the stick there in terms of responsibility and weight. But he's saying it's not just about don't sleep with somebody else. It's about the person who's actually there that your heart is bound to. Begin to love that individual and that person. And if you ever get angry at yourself that you're not growing fast enough, like we all do, apparently God is okay with slow growth. This took about 1,500 years. Just to begin to take steps towards looking and becoming the kind of person that God wanted them to become. And in our culture, in our world, we're afraid of failure. Failure is our greatest enemy often, but in the scriptures, failure is not a big deal at all. In the scriptures, you read stories of every great person has failed. They've fallen on their face 1,000 times. They've gotten off the path. They've gone the scenic route in terms of where they're supposed to go. But for God, failure is not the enemy. Staying the same is the enemy. And not growing and waking up in 10 years and saying, I'm the exact same person in my heart and character as I was 10 years ago. That is the enemy, not failure. And so I don't know what the step is for you as we wrap this series up. If I began to say, hey, this is the step, do these 5 things, that's legalism. That's not helpful to anybody. But for us as individuals, saying in my life, it's different for you than it is for me. And I'm still trying to wrap my own head and heart around what's the step for me in 2017 from where I am on the faith journey, not yet carried to completion, but doing my best to begin to reflect the love of God to the world. What's the next step for me? Maybe it's in terms of your marriage with your husband or wife. Oftentimes, couples will come into my office for counseling, and usually it's the wife who set this appointment up. And you begin to dig in on the problem or ask questions. And one of the things that typically the wife will say somewhere along the way is, well, he's not a spiritual leader in our house. He doesn't pray with us. He doesn't read the Bible to us. And that's a huge part of the problem is we started journeying in faith, and now this is an obstacle in our marriage. And you start digging in on that. You start asking questions. You're like, well, was he ever doing Bible studies in the house? Was he ever like leading these epic Bible studies that you remember? Well, no. Well, what was going on earlier? Well, nothing really. Well, you didn't marry like Rick Warren. You married like Ricky Bobby back here. And I don't know if this is the right crowd for a Ricky Bobby reference, but you're wanting him to like lead the purpose-driven life, but he's like still praying to baby Jesus. I mean, he's like, at this point in the faith journey, you didn't marry him because he was like John the Baptist. You married him because he looked vaguely like John Mayer on that night. And if you're that husband, you're going, well, I'm not that person. I don't know what to do. And she wants me to become somebody I'm not. What can you do? Well, I can pray at dinner tonight. That's a step. I can begin to tell my kids why I take them to church and why I value God in my heart, why it's significant that we prioritize our faith. I can begin to tell my wife, my kids, my own faith story. I can begin to talk about God in sentences, not paragraphs. I can begin to say when my wife comes home at the end of a long work day and she's fried, I can begin to say, I'm going to pray for you about that. And step by step by step, you begin to look more and more like the kind of husband you want to look like and the kind of husband that she wants you to look like. And it's not that you wake up tomorrow and go, well, I'm leading 7 mission trips with a family this year. It's just step by step. Maybe it's in terms of other people. Our culture values tolerating people, and that's fine. I'm not knocking that, but as Christ followers, we're actually called to more than just tolerating people. I'm going to tolerate him, I'm going to tolerate her means I'm not going to shoot that person when they walk in the house or walk in the office. And we're called beyond tolerating towards love. And maybe for you, it's, you know what? I've been tolerating that person, but I think I can do a little better than that. I'm going to begin to forgive them. Everybody else has been railing against them at work and is bitter. I think I'm going to let go of that. What's the next step that God's calling you to take? Maybe it's in terms of worship. And it's great that you're not bowing down to false gods, but we have a weekend rhythm at CRB called weekend celebrations. We do this every single week. And one of our core values here at our church is about prioritizing this as a family. And for Roseanne and I, it's about bringing our kids here on a weekly basis and celebrating God, worshiping God. And maybe for you, it's say, you know, when I'm in town as a family, we're going to make that a part of the rhythm of our life. It's not just, well, we don't worship false gods. We're going to begin to love the God who's actually there. That's a step in the direction that God's inviting us to go. I don't know what the step is for you, but I know the character and the nature of God is to meet you wherever you are and say, this step you could do, not the massive leap, but the incremental steps. And over time, that's going to accumulate. Over time, that's going to add up, and you're going to start to go, whoa, I'm becoming a different kind of person. I'm getting where God wants me to be, one step at a time. I love that Jesus met with the 12 disciples the night before he was crucified, and we're going to take the elements of communion together in just a moment. But the night before Christ was crucified, he gathered with 12 guys, with 12 different faith stories. And he takes the bread and he takes the cup and he says, this is my body, this is my blood, broken for you, shed for you. And it is a reminder that wherever you go from this moment, the living God is right there in the middle of the journey with you. This morning, we're going to take the elements of the bread and the cup. The band is going to come, the ushers are going to come and begin to serve the plate, the bread, the cup. May these elements, as you think through the steps of your own heart, your own life, who God's calling you to be, where God's calling you to go. I don't know what the step is, but I know who is going to meet you in the middle of the journey. Whether it's the direct route or whether it's going to be the scenic route for you. I know the God who wants to meet you there, and these elements are a reminder that he is with you every step of the way. Ushers, at this time, would you come and begin to serve the cup? If for some reason you can't take the elements, would you just raise your hand, and our ushers would love to serve you in your seat. At this time, let's take the Lord's Supper together.